Hey everyone, if you're gearing up for your exams and looking for a BA Economics Unit 4 quick revision, you have landed in exactly the right place. Today, we're diving into the absolute roller coaster that is the history of the Indian economy. We'll be tracing its evolution from those early days of strict, centralized planning right up to the hyper-globalized market we live in today. Let's just jump right in.
Here's our quick roadmap for today. We'll kick things off with the era of economic planning, look at the core strategies, and weigh their successes and failures. Then, we'll cover the end of the 5-year plans, hit the massive 1991 LPG reforms, and wrap up with their current impact.
All right, Part 1. The Era of Economic Planning.
It's kind of wild to look at these milestones and see just how much the country's economic steering wheel has shifted over the decades. It all started back in 1950 with the Planning Commission, which was a very top-down, centralized approach to allocating a newly independent nation's resources. We see the heavy industry push in '56, and of course the massive 1991 reforms. But for your exams, pay special attention to the end of this timeline. In 2015, the transition to Niti Aayog marked a huge structural pivot. It was a move toward collaborative federalism, essentially swapping a top-down mandate for a bottom-up strategy that actually brings the states into the economic planning process.
Now, that newly independent government had a massive, idealized wish list basically built around these 6 core objectives. The goals were super ambitious: drive economic growth to bump up per capita income, ensure full employment, and push for equity to close that wealth gap. They also desperately wanted self-reliance to avoid depending on foreign powers, alongside the modernization of industry and balanced regional development so that backward states wouldn't get left behind. But from an economic standpoint, think about the inherent tension here. For instance, rapidly modernizing industries with advanced machinery? Well, that can actually make it way harder to achieve full employment in a country with abundant labor.
Moving on to Part 2, Core Strategies of Planning.
You definitely want to lock this into your memory for the test, because to hit those big objectives, the strategic model shifted dramatically in just 5 years. The first plan relied heavily on the Herod-Domar model, putting all its chips on agriculture and banking on high domestic savings to drive capital formation. But then, by the second plan, boom, a total pivot to the Mahalanobis strategy. This model was completely obsessed with rapid industrialization through heavy capital goods. The idea was that building machines that build other machines creates this massive long-term multiplier effect. And tying this whole era together was the mixed economy approach. They consciously rejected pure capitalism and pure socialism, choosing instead to let public and private sectors coexist.
Section 3. Planning, Successes, and Failures.
So how did all this planning actually pan out? Well, it's a true mixed bag. On one hand, you literally cannot deny the wins. The Green Revolution of the 1960s successfully made India self-reliant in food grains, a super robust industrial base was established, and life expectancy skyrocketed. But chronic pressures were bubbling right under the surface. That heavy industrial push we just talked about, it simply didn't create enough jobs, leading to stubborn, persistent unemployment. Many of the public sector undertakings, the PSUs, that were supposed to drive growth ended up bloated, crippled by bureaucracy, and bleeding money. Throw in high inflation and regional disparities, and you had a situation where some states were surging ahead, while the wealth gap for the average citizen just kept widening.
Let's look at Section 4, the end of 5-year plans.
8%. That was the magic number. It was the highly ambitious GDP growth target set for the 12th and ultimately final 5-year plan, which was aiming for faster, more inclusive growth. But this long-standing era had a hard stop. In 2017, the entire framework of 5-year plans was permanently retired. The strategy fundamentally changed. They replaced those rigid 5-year blocks with fluid, long-term vision documents, like Vision India at 2047, completely changing how the nation's economy is steered today.
Which brings us to Section 5, the absolute climax of our economic history story, the 1991 LPG reforms. By mid-1991, all those simmering economic pressures we discussed culminated in a frankly terrifying reality, a massive balance of payments crisis. Foreign exchange reserves dropped so low that the country could barely pay for a few weeks of essential imports, like oil. I mean, it was a true survival crisis. India famously had to physically airlift its national gold reserves to pledge as collateral just to stay afloat. To pull the economy back from the brink, Prime Minister P.V. Narasimha Rao and Finance Minister Dr. Manmohan Singh executed an emergency, radical pivot known as the New Economic Policy, and it was built on 3 pillars. The L stands for liberalization, which was essentially unshackling the domestic economy. For decades, businesses were absolutely choked by the license raj.
Think exhausting bureaucratic red tape and endless government approvals just to open a small factory or expand production. Liberalization took a sledgehammer to this. It abolished industrial licensing for most sectors, finally gave businesses the freedom to determine their own capacities and pricing, and simplified the tax structure. For the first time in a long time, the market could actually breathe.
Next up, P for privatization. This was a massive ideological U-turn. Remember those inefficient, loss-making PSUs from the earlier decades? Well, the government began pulling back, transferring ownership and management control of these enterprises over to the private sector. Through disinvestment, which is just selling off government shares to private investors, and by allowing private participation in core infrastructure, the state strategically stepped back from trying to be the primary producer of goods and services. And finally, the G, globalization. This blew India's borders wide open to the world. The government aggressively integrated the domestic economy globally by slashing massive import duties and dropping quantitative restrictions on trade. Crucially, they rolled out the red carpet for foreign direct investment, or FDI. Letting in up to 100% foreign investment in several sectors through automatic routes was a total shock to a system that had previously prioritized strict, closed-off self-reliance.
Wrapping up with Part 6, the current impact of globalization, from 1991 to right now.
The crazy thing is, you can draw a straight economic line directly from those 1991 reforms right to our modern reality. From having just weeks of forex left, India now sits on historic foreign exchange reserves and is a massive global magnet for FDI. Globalization is what catalyzed India's total dominance in the service sector, turning it into the worldwide hub for IT, BPO, and medical tourism. And on the manufacturing side, that push is still happening right now with initiatives like Make in India and production-linked incentive schemes drawing billions in private capital. Even the privatization trend is alive and well today. Just look at the complete handover of Air India or the leasing of state assets through the national monetization pipeline. It is the direct continuation of that 1991 ideology.
So, we've traced this incredible journey from idealistic centralized planning to an aggressive, hyper-globalized market. But I want to leave you with a profound question, something to chew on for your final exam essays. Globalization undeniably brought massive growth and modernization, for sure. But did it cost us economic equality? Small domestic cottage industries have been absolutely battered by competition from multinational giants, and the wealth gap, the exact same inequality the original 1950 planners desperately wanted to fix, remains one of today's most stubborn challenges. It's the ultimate economic trade-off, and one that policymakers are still scrambling to balance today. Good luck with your revision, and thanks for exploring this with me.